Podcast w zielonej Ukrainie, bariery i szanse powojennej odbudowy. Zapraszam, Michał Sutowski. A właściwie in green Ukraine, bo dziś będziemy rozmawiać po angielsku z moją gościnią z Ukrainy, Anną Ackermann. Hello, this is the third episode of our podcast series on green reconstruction of Ukraine, made by Krytyka Polityczna together with Heinrich Böll Stiftung, Heinrich Böll Stiftung's office in Warsaw. My guest today is Anna Ackermann from Ukraine, an activist, an expert on energy and green transition, and what is most important here, the co-founder of EcoDia, or Center for Environmental Initiatives, EcoAction, a group advocating for energy efficiency, renewable energy, countering climate change, clean air for all, and sustainable development of transport and agriculture in Ukraine. And Anna on her Twitter introduces herself as usually tweeting on #climate, #energy, #environment. Now it's all about Ukraine. Hello.
Hello. Hello, everyone.
So now it's all about Ukraine, not only due to the fact that EcoDia works in Ukraine, but also due to the fact, as I understand, that Ukraine is in a state of war. It's defending itself from Russian aggression, and this is why I would like to ask you a very direct question for the beginning, namely, you and EcoDia, so the organization you work with, you advocate for green transition of Ukraine, as I understand. But actually, why should people in your country care for the climate, planet in the future, planet as a whole, when they struggle to survive next days and weeks? And so don't they actually, to put it simply, prioritize tanks and HIMARS over solar panels, at least for now?
Well, I probably need to start with the fact that, of course, tanks and HIMARS and all the military help is essential, and it's number one for Ukraine because we want to win. And I also would like to start by saying thank you to Poland for this amazing support, and I think we're not saying this enough. Of course, in our work, as we are an environmental NGO, we are doing everything we can to also help the country to win, and we believe in our victory. But then, I will tell maybe a few things now why we think environmental and climate issues still remain important. But at the same time, just like probably all of the NGOs and all of the civil society organizations that exist in Ukraine, they, of course, have been involved in providing humanitarian support to Ukrainians too during this time and to our army. But at the same time, environmental and climate issues, they of course are moved aside from the strategic perspective. That happens during wartime in Ukraine, and it also happened, everywhere, whenever you had conflicts or wars. But environmental protection, in fact, is about survival too, because environment and clean environment, it's clean water, it's clean soil, and clean air, which are actually crucial to actually have people living normally at any given moment in time, be it wartime or not. There is a very emblematic image for me that you might have seen too, when Russia's forces were kicked out by our army in the north of Ukraine, in the north of Kiev. There was this image taken by the drone of a smashed Russian tank, and just nearby, people started planting cabbage and growing it just like in their yard straight away when Russians left. And there is everything in this image. So on one hand, you have this destruction, but then you have the vision of hope. But at the same time, there is something invisible. In fact, those soils where the cabbage is growing are probably polluted by the heavy metals, and people are not even thinking about that. Although that would have very much long-term consequences in the future for people who would be consuming actually those products, who they don't even think about it, but it's just the way it is. So our organization, and this was unusual for us, because we mostly worked on climate policies, sustainable agriculture, and energy transition before the full-scale invasion of Russia. But then, since spring, we started tracking all of the environmental damages of this war to show these huge consequences that we may have. And at the same time, it's talking about environment, but then climate policies and everything that is climate related was probably kind of moved aside, but you would probably be surprised to know that our cities, those at least who are not right in the front lines, are close to the front lines, they keep thinking strategically about their future. And just recently, for example, Lviv adopted their sustainable energy and climate action plan because they're just simply moving aside with what they started before the full-scale invasion. And things like heat pumps or solar PV panels with storage, they all actually became as important as never now when our very centralized energy system is getting destroyed. So in any case, to sum up, environmental and climate issues, I think they did not become relevant in the way we are thinking about them, but in fact, they are as relevant as never because again, it's directly related to people's well-being, their lives, and also, in fact, actual survival today.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned like the sustainable energy and climate solutions in one of your cities close to the border with Poland, namely Lviv. But this is, and you mentioned they started this actually before even before the war. Now, as Ukraine has got the status of a candidate state for the European Union, also the European Green Deal, the Fit for 55, so the all the policies aimed at climate neutrality in the longer term, they become also the part of your country's economic, legal, social, and political agenda. But my question would be, do you think that those great policies, big political projects, can help you rebuild your country after war? Because, post-war reconstruction is something that, requires, as we know from history, requires a lot of fuel, energy, concrete, steel, everything which is associated with a old school economic growth. Yeah. And the question is, of course, do you think this reconstruction of Ukraine, can this be done in accordance with climate, environment, and environmental goals? And can those European programs, European policies help you with the reconstruction?
To answer very shortly to your questions, yes and yes. The question would be how actually things will look like in real life. I would like to point out that during the last climate negotiations in Egypt, during COP27, where Ukraine had its pavilion for the first time ever, and we could be talking about also the impact of Russian invasion, not only on Ukraine, but the whole world, of course. Ukrainian international experts presented a study showing the climate consequences of Russia's war. The numbers were around. So after 7 months of the invasion, we are talking about approximately 100 million tons of CO2 emissions caused by the war, which is around 1/3 of annual emissions of Ukraine. But the important part of all of this is that a very big chunk of those emissions will actually, those which did not happen because they're tied to the need to reconstruct. And as you rightly pointed out, reconstruction will probably not be super clean. It will be important how we're going to be rebuilding, because would we be rebuilding in business as usual scenario? We are in a fight against time in a way, because of course, people in Ukraine, of course, the government, the president, they say we will want to rebuild as quickly as possible to return to normal life. And the question would be how fast, but also what would be the quality of those reconstruction. So what we are trying to advocate for now is that while we have this moment in time, while of course we have to be dealing with urgent needs and everything, but there are also experts in Ukraine and abroad who are proposing their help. And together we need to develop new standards today. So to develop those standards with which we could build straight away so much better and well for the generations to come. And a good example, I think, that anybody can think of is buildings. So many buildings were destroyed in Ukraine, whole residential areas in Kharkiv, Mariupol and Bucha and Irpin, everywhere. How do you rebuild? For the moment, the current standard in Ukraine is approximately energy efficiency class C, which is just like a box. It's energy efficient, but there is not much there. There is gas heating and everything. So kind of a usual 20th century approach. So the EU Green Deal, in fact, with everything that comes with it, has to be taken seriously, because in there, we can take all the best out of it and try to implement that and try to put into policies already today, such as, for example, the near zero energy buildings and having this sort of standards for the new buildings in Ukraine. So this will be the implementation of the EU Green Deal and taken seriously by all parties, and Ukraine reconstruction as such could become an important project where the EU and Ukraine, could show what that actual green future is. But at the same time, of course, we are facing the reality, and the reality is where in the EU taxonomy there is gas and nuclear, so there is fossil fuels bound, and it gives the green light to produce gas in Ukraine to again lock us in also for the new buildings and infrastructure for the households around the same technologies that exist, maybe newer in terms of energy efficiency or something, but it's still fossil fuels. So coming back to your question, the reconstruction can be done according to environmental and climate goals if we start preparing already today. At the same time, I have to say I have very mixed feelings, because it's not like it's happening already now. And probably it won't be that green. In fact, no post-war reconstruction has ever been green in the history of humankind. Our role is to make it, greener, so as much better as possible. Greener not only from the perspective of environment, but really more sustainable. So something that would bring, again, for generations to come, good for people in the first place. And that really is a lot about actually climate solutions, and not just, again, old technologies that existed and exist today.
Mm. Well, clearly, like in the history, when we take like post-World War II reconstruction, especially in the Western Europe, but also in the Eastern one, it was clearly based on coal, oil, and later natural gas, partially nuclear, but not in every country. In France, probably. But you said facing reality. Part of this reality, I think, for the post-war Ukraine is like the pre-war Ukrainian structure of industry. It is actually sort of an advantage for the economy that it still has industry, because as we know, especially from Western Europe, countries who have lost the industries, they got a lot of social problems, social tensions. UK could be probably a good example for that. Other countries like Germany, for example, but also Poland, they have like large share of industry in the GDP, and this is actually good in many respects, but not necessarily from environmental point of view. So, but my specific question would be that, many EU policies concerning climate and environment, they create a huge challenge for industries in the countries like, for example, Poland, with its energy-intensive industry and transportation. And of course, also Ukraine has a lot of its economy based on things like steel production, fossil fuels extraction, raw materials as well. So the question would be, do you think you can make those challenges into opportunities in terms of post-war reconstruction?
Well, if we look at the larger picture of what happened since 24th of February, what we saw very clearly and what we were closing really much eyes at before, this war is a fossil fuel war financed by fossil fuels, because we know that Russia gets the big chunk of their state budget from their exports of fossil fuels abroad. And then they're launching missiles, basically, purchased or paid by those fossil fuel exports. Russia's actions led to the energy crisis unseen in decades. And we have to understand that there are, these deep reasons for substantial changes in the EU and also in many countries around the world. We, of course, in the EU, and the first reaction in the EU has been replacing Russian fossil fuels with fossil fuels from other countries. But the question is this the answer?
Green Minister Robert Habeck going to Qatar and buying LNG. Yeah, from
yeah.
the
So of course, in longer mid-term, we are talking about renewables, but this is what's happening today. Why I'm saying this, because it also would have been important to be thinking straight away, understanding that we are in a wartime. I think Poland, we don't need to explain this to Poland, but for many countries probably we still do. Cutting on consumption, energy efficiency measures and everything. Instead, we are just trying to pay out the bills of the fossil fuel companies and, invest in a lot again in the same infrastructure. But then coming back to Ukraine and your question. So Ukraine's intensive industries that existed, that also, of course, were fossil fuel based, were an important part of our GDP. The big facilities like in Mariupol, the Azov, those steelworks and so on. But how, if we think even for the past, how long lasting would that have been and how sustainable? They were absolutely, polluting and really, really bad from some perspective, but although they were given jobs, of course. We can think also of our coal mining towns, which were so the industry was largely in decline for a very long time, for decades. Our organization started to work with the coal mining towns on just transition. We came to them back in 2017 and 18 and asked, how do you see your future? They said, well, we don't know. And we definitely don't see the future of coal in this country. Definitely, because they just saw this decline. So we started working with them. And now, when coal mines are flooded in the east largely and without possibility to restore them anymore, we understand there will be no investments into coal industry for sure, because who would be financing new coal facilities? No one. And I think when we were discussing the reconstruction plan in Ukraine back in May and June with experts, with the ministries, everybody understood that coal is no go anymore. So now when coal mines are flooded, all industrial facilities, some of them are completely erased from the ground. It's time to ask, what kind of economy are we actually building? What's going to be replacing that? And the tendency is, of course, to say, we want to have what we already had before. We just want everything back. But is that realistic? And is this what Ukrainians actually want? I think we didn't have time to have these discussions in Ukraine because we're at a wartime, so we are talking about survival. But it's also important to be asking these questions. And setting these clear priorities is crucial. They should be really, really clear, and that would help investors to come. What kind of economy are we building? And this will be bound directly to what kind of energy mix we're going to have, how much energy we need, and what exactly would be in that energy mix. So I think Ukraine has to become something much more than a raw material base, than the agriculture base for Europe and the world. And answering this question, what kind of economy we're building, and probably we're going to have and find these answers together, and hopefully also with the European partners too, because we really need to make sure that Ukraine is this integral part of the European family in the end.
Mm-hmm. But actually, I think that actually the other side of the coin of this question of the old industries being in decline, the question who is going to finance it, and potential reinvestment in that's so to say one side of the problem. The other one would be, in my opinion, or the question to be discussed is that, well, the green solutions like the renewables, the hydrogen technologies, and many others, they also have, of course, like each kind of energy technology and energy solution, and not only in terms of energy, they also have their own, so to say, geopolitical dimension. They also have their political economy, so to say, meaning that, well, for example, if you want to invest in something, someone owns advanced technology, someone has to buy it, someone can earn on that. So my question is, do you believe that Ukraine has a potential to become also a producer, a country that can be a site of like those post-carbon technologies, not only, as you said, as raw materials like backup for the rest of the Europe, for European Union, but also a participant in the green transition, also with some political economic advantages. Do you see such prospects for your country?
Well, I definitely do, and in fact, Ukraine has already been a producer of solar panels, for example, parts of wind turbines. They were not necessarily, for the moment, were meant to be exported to the EU, but still this production exists and it has to be developed. And it's very recent that Ukraine had only a few years ago, we had in central Ukraine opening of a large solar PV production facility. And in Kramatorsk in the east, where you would have also steel works and people who know how to deal with complicated equipment, that were producing these parts of wind turbines for more for the eastern market. But really, this has to go ahead, and this is where Ukraine has the knowledge, people, and capacities. Hopefully, of course, these are the questions actually how that could be preserved because of the war. But in any case, again, and also actually energy efficiency materials. In addition to that, many things could be developed further. What we saw before the full-scale invasion and the kind of discussions that existed in terms of the Ukraine becoming, producer for the EU, one of important discussions was about hydrogen. So German Chancellor came a year ago or something to Kiev and saying that there will be a hydrogen diplomacy office in Kiev. And there was this part. Everybody was talking hydrogen. At the same time, we understand hydrogen is a lot about hype. So is it real? Because we don't know how much of green hydrogen we could be producing. But I was asking myself exactly this question, and with the colleagues, we started digging a little bit of how that could look like. And if you think of Ukraine having a large new solar power field, a station like a field or a huge wind turbine station, and then producing electricity on the spot, transforming that into green hydrogen, and then exporting everything to Europe. What kind of business is it? What does it give to Ukraine except for a few jobs? So again, how sustainable is that? And then another conversation, which also still continues together with hydrogen, is, and then I think it's gaining speed, is Ukraine producing critical raw materials for Europe's energy transition, because we do have some reserves, and there were some plans to develop this. All right, is this enough to actually rebuild Ukraine again in a good way, in a sustainable way? And I believe that Ukraine could and should be viewed as an equal partner, high in supply and value chains, producing not just raw materials, but technologies. Why not producing heat pumps, which are so much needed now everywhere? Everybody wants to replace gas, Why not producing heat pumps together with Poland and building these supply chains together? Poland has a success story with the heat pumps, and now it's one of the largest, I think it's the largest market in Europe and one of the best grown in the world. Or at the same time, high quality energy efficiency materials. Of course, again, there is so many questions around that. How would that be possible? Investors would need wartime guarantees or after-war guarantees. In any case, we understand this. And this is something that has been already discussed. Something that also is important to think about is human capital and capacity building. That will be very crucial. There are so many workers, Ukrainian workers, who've been living and actually constructing buildings in Poland or in Czech Republic, and they know how to build according to their most recent standards. So actually how to also return them back home when we would need them. There are many questions. So today I'm asking maybe many questions instead of answering them, because it's a good time to actually be discussing this, I think, and thinking about this already today.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned talking to the people in the industrial, not yet post-industrial regions of Ukraine, being aware of the fact that their industries are in decline. And this brings me to the question of democratic participation within this process. Because as we know, the green transition in Europe faces of course, creates many controversies due to the fact that the costs and benefits are not equally shared by different social groups. We face some kind of backlash, especially within the old industrial regions. It is something we would probably see also in Poland, especially in the regions where the lignite is extracted and the coal and the electricity produced from that energy source. And of course, there is a more general critique of the green transition, showing that this is sort of a technocratic idea imposed in a top-down manner. And of course, there is a reaction to that. Yellow vests, of course, is some sort of a handbook case for that backlash. So my question to you is: do you see what kind of instruments, what kind of policies could prevent backlash in your country from that, and how to involve Ukrainian people in the society, not just its elites or big business, into that process, so that they would see that they are also benefiting from that process directly, not only in general terms like the fate of the planet.
Well, I guess there are two sides of your question. One is how people perceive the green transition, and another one is about public participation as such. So in terms of perceiving this green transition or energy transition, I think everybody before the full-scale invasion thought that it was expensive. So maybe just like yellow vests, we didn't have protests because of this, but in any case, everybody thinks, okay, how much does it cost to get the solar?
It means
solar
just
panel?
green technology means that fuel will be more expensive, for example, or heating will be more expensive. Yeah, that's.
I think we didn't even reach that far in our thinking in Ukraine, and also because the energy prices were still subsidized and now more than ever. But in any case, indeed, because of this, actually, because the energy prices were heavily subsidized. Getting a solar panel would seem absolutely useless, or even doing energy efficiency and having energy efficiency measures was also not very popular, let's say. And now so much has changed. Now, clearly the priority for Ukrainians, they know now, and I think you don't need to debate that, it's security and resilience. And this became so much important than any costs. So even cost, although of course it's not like we are super rich, absolutely not. But having electricity at home became a matter again of survival, or being able to connect anywhere. Maybe I don't need to explain, but just to say that electricity, we saw how electricity is crucial. What happened in Mariupol is a good example, because during winter time, Russia attacked straight away power production, and we saw there was no electricity. There is no, of course, net connection, so mobile operators were out very quickly. Also, straight away, water supply system stopped operating, heating stopped operating. That's it. So you're freezing. You don't know what's going on. You cannot call anyone. You're basically, you're kind of doomed, and you don't know what's happening anymore. So we don't want that anymore. So again, security and resilience, and this is what makes sense in people's minds. And we saw how already in spring, there were first projects with solar panels and storage facilities around the country. And now there is the whole new, I think there's the whole new wave. While Ukraine is getting lots of diesel generators from everywhere, right? And we do need them to survive this winter. But at the same time, in kind of midterm, and those municipalities who are thinking a bit more strategically, they understand that if they get solar panels for their critical infrastructure, like hospitals, water supply systems, it would save them tons of money. And in terms of security, that's also good, because you don't need to buy lots of diesel, or you're not as dependent on diesel anymore, and so on. So this is one part, and this is what's happening, that again, costs and the perception of energy transition, and who is, I think we moved away from this, oligarchs owning green stuff. We understand now, and it came much closer to us now. We know what it means to be producing electricity just where you are, because we see, okay, there is the diesel generator, and then we are moving toward, okay, what about having a solar panel, and so on. So this is an interesting development and a very important one. And about public participation, in talks about reconstruction, at the moment we're in a time when information is largely closed. We see, which is normal during the wartime, I think, there is a big centralization of policy-making, decision-making, and of power in the presidential office, in the government. And at the same time, decentralization is one of the most successful reforms that does need to stand boom and continue. Is under question of to which extent municipalities, cities, and public participates in those decision making. We are questioning this. We are trying to make sure that we are aware of the most important developments. And I think Ukraine will never be the same again. We moved away from any authoritarian attempts back in 2014. So we will be, demanding transparency for sure. And civil society here plays an important role. And it's as crucial as never now. And will be in the future, of course, including to promote this green recovery. I think when we look at what civil society efforts, what cities in Ukraine are doing, it gives lots of hope for that it will be actually possible. So many things are changing, and what you're saying, I understand, still persists a lot around the EU and maybe in the world also further. And I really hope that in Ukraine this will give this push for the changes.
Mm-hmm. So my final question would be, more directly political one, namely, how would you convince, let's put it in quotation marks, a typical opportunist Western European voter? How would you convince such a person, a German or a Dutch, that not only sending arms, but also integrating Ukraine into EU and into EU climate policies, also including a strong financial support from the West, is a good idea also in terms of their own self-interest. So how can Europe, the Western Europe, benefit from integrating EU into this green European framework?
Right. I guess already answering previously, I gave some ideas. So now I would even say more generally speaking, because I would ask this typical opportunistic, Western European voter first, what is his or her self-interest exactly about? Because of course, many people are affected now by the cost of living crisis, and it may not get better in the coming years. So this is a problem. But then I think everything, if you dig a bit deeper, it all comes to security. And security is the essence. Again, our neighbors understand, Poland understand that this is important. And I think we have to keep stressing on that. We all want to live in peace. We all want to have access to electricity, to water, to heating, go to see football match with friends, and spend time, for Christmas with our loved ones. And these are all of the things that Russia took away from Ukrainians and trying to take away from Ukrainians, from Europeans, because we are Europeans. Ukrainians are dying today for European values, protecting Europe and hoping for better future, because we do. So we do have to keep the optimism, because there is not much sense to keep this fight otherwise, right? So having Ukraine joining the European family officially is a way to be united and to be secure together. Ukraine, I think, is proving already that it can secure the peace in Europe, and I'm sure we will keep fighting for this. And then once the war is won together, we will come back to fight to the next global challenge, which did not disappear. It's climate change, and it's still there. And some things could be done to fight it already today. And also to say on the side note that, of course, Ukraine is not perfect. No country or no human being is perfect. We need to do our homework to progress many reforms, move ahead with adopting the European legislation. And we will keep moving ahead, because, again, as I said, there is no way back anymore. There is clear understanding at all the levels in Ukraine that we are moving toward the EU and willing to integrate and willing to, to be part of this, the EU Green Deal and whatever exists, whatever values are there, which we not only share, but I think Ukrainians are these values today, and they're showing this with all of this courage and bravery. So yes, this is the way. So it's a bit more general, because thinking about climate, even for me, who has worked on climate for many years, is complicated in this situation. Especially today, Russia did the attack again on our critical infrastructure, and colleagues are without, again, water, electricity, or anything. But again, everybody is doing everything they can to win, and do everything they can also, notwithstanding the circumstances, to make the country better for the future and for our children, for the generations to come.
Great. Thank you very much. This was the third episode of our podcast on green recovery, green reconstruction of Ukraine. Anna Ackermann from Ukraine, from EcoDia, was my guest. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This was the third episode of our podcast, supported by Heinrich-Böll Stiftung in Warsaw. My name is Michał Sutowski. You can listen to our podcast on the website www.krytykapolityczna.pl/podcast, as well as on Spotify, SoundCloud, and Apple Podcast. Thank you very much.